Hi, and welcome again to Lake Minnetonka Association Presents. It's 2012. I've been doing this for 12 or 13 years. Did you know that?
You just told us that a little while ago.
Not continuously, every other month or so, but been having fun with that. With me today, Kim Chapman and Matt Lasch from Applied Ecological Services. We're going to talk about restoring Lakeshores. Kim, we've known each other for over 20 years.
Yes, we have.
And Matt, we've known each other for over 20 minutes now.
Yeah, that's right.
So, well, thank you for coming. Let's get right into it. Kim, tell us what Applied Ecological Services does and why.
We are a full-service ecological consulting firm. We have three divisions: a consulting group, a contracting group, and a nursery group. And our driving mission really is to improve the health of the land, to bring the science of ecology to all land use decisions. We have offices across the United States in a number of locations. And on top of that, we are very much dedicated to working closely with people to help them solve their ecological problems on their properties.
We have support groups too, right?
Yes, we do.
All right.
And then what I do for the company is I'm a what's called a principal ecologist, and that means it's my job to go out and find new work. It's my job to lead the projects, to be the technical expert, and I've got about 30 years experience of doing that sort of thing.
I knew that.
That's right.
Yeah. You were at Nature Conservancy. I was at Metro Council when we met 21 years ago or so.
And we used to talk about what we were going to do next, and who would have imagined that we'd be sitting here so many years later on a TV show.
I figured I'd be running a Dairy Queen. Oh well.
Oh well.
Well, good. Matt?
And I run the contracting division, so we have the crews that go out and do the work. We're out there doing the seeding, doing the planting, doing the implementation, the management. So I kind of see the project from once it's designed to the end when the client is happy and we walk away from the project.
So Kim gets the work, you do the work.
That's right.
Sweet.
That's right. I make them look good.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, good. So you make unhealthy, unpleasant shorelines look pretty and work better.
Yes, we do. I think everyone knows what these unhealthy shoreline looks like. We can have a slide up here in just a second to illustrate that. There we go. So everyone has seen this sort of thing along the shorelines of Lake Minnetonka or elsewhere, different locations. The main problems here from an ecological standpoint is there's sediment falling into the lake, number one. And that sediment carries with it phosphorus and possibly other pollutants. Those phosphorus molecules contribute to algae blooms. You might see this in corners of bays, on smaller bodies of water. Of course, it's quite common. And then, of course, the habitat is not the best for fish, for wildlife like the egrets that like to fish along the shoreline. And it's unsightly and maybe even a little bit unsafe. Let's take a look at this next slide here, which shows some slopes. There's a lot of water coming off the cropland around lakes and urban areas, and it winds up washing away soil around the roots of trees that are on slopes of ravines and starts to erode stream banks. And so you can see that in both of these situations. It's not something that anybody really likes to see or think about, and it usually needs to be fixed.
All right. Well, now we know what the problem is. What do you do about it?
Well, the interesting thing about this is there's really a fork in the road. Once someone says to themselves, I have a problem, I don't like what I'm seeing, then what? You can go with the hard armoring approach. And if we bring up the next slide, I'm going to show an extreme case of this. The image on the left is a stormwater treatment pond, and there's not a speck of vegetation around that. That's 100% cobbles right on down to the bottom of that pond, steep slopes leading down into it. It's really hard for any form of life to get a toehold there. So clearly what you're doing in that situation is using the engineering and the hard materials to stabilize those slopes. On the right is this other idea, which is that of a naturalized shoreline. And in the naturalized shoreline, of course, you try to work with nature. You try to use methods to stabilize the slope that are more natural, and then you use the power of native plant species to develop a deep root system which becomes stable over time and stronger over time.
Many of our members have reacted to initiatives from the watershed district or one or more cities and believe that a natural shoreline just means letting it grow wild. That's not what we're talking about here, is it?
I don't think so. You can have natural wild shorelines, Dick, and they still might be falling into the lake.
Yep.
So the challenge really is to find those locations where you want to make a difference and to think about how can we do that in a way that achieves multiple benefits. Let's go to this next slide. We'll just talk about some of those benefits. Why would you want to take that fork in the road off towards the naturalized shoreline instead of the hardscape? Well, first of all, you do a better job of holding that soil in place. Really key, though, is that natural vegetation and that soil actually removes pollutants from the runoff that's flowing across it into the lake. So you start to get some pollution abatement. The other thing is you really start to attract wildlife species like that egret in the upper right, the Sora rail in the lower left. It becomes great fish habitat because the young fingerlings like to hang out in the vegetation close to the shore. And the neat thing is once those native roots get started, the system becomes stronger with each passing year because the root system keeps developing and keeps filling up the soil space versus an engineered structure where the minute you walk away from it, the waves and the ice and the frost begin to start to decay it and break it down.
So this is an alternative to, you called it hard armoring. Most people around here think of it as riprap.
Riprap, yep, that's another word for it.
Yep.
And let's just look at the next two slides here very quickly. So this is sort of the process. You go from something that's got a lot of steep banks. In the left-hand image, you can see we've actually flattened out those banks. The next step is the planting step, and then you wind up with something that looks like that on the right. The next slide shows a number of examples from around the Midwest where this naturalization process has taken place. And of course, the big challenge for a lot of people is it looks like a bunch of weeds, right? But what we have to remember is that, first of all, some of these are quite young, and wildflowers do grow in this. Secondly, you're getting all those multiple benefits from having that naturalized shoreline, and you can fit this into an aesthetic by defining the edges of this with mowed turf or with a hardscape like a lawn or a trail. So it really isn't that intrusive, and you can sort of use this where you need to use it on the shoreline and still keep a place that is going to look nice over the long term.
All right, well, you don't wave a wand and it happens. What do you do?
Well, the first thing you do is someone like myself or Doug Mensing, another one of our staff people, and Matt Lasch would go and visit with the landowner. We talk to them about the problem. Oftentimes there are a number of interesting twists on the situation. They may want a path here, or they may say, I want this dock to be clear. Or there's a problem with upstream erosion coming down and cutting a cut in their shoreline. And so what they'll do is ask us to think harder about what we're planning to do there for them, and we'll sketch up a design. And then the design includes in that, let's have a look at this next slide here. The design includes in it a plan view, which is just looking down like on a map. And sometimes we'll put in some cross-sectional diagrams or little details that tell you specifically what's going to happen where in a profile. One of the projects Matt's going to talk about in a minute here, Camptico, it had a eroding ravine coming in from the uplands, crossing the beach, and then the beach itself needed some stabilization. So we like to think about not just what's going on the shoreline, but also what's going on to the left uphill of the shoreline. Is there water washing in? What's adjacent to it? Do you have a natural oak woods next to it, or do you have a lawn next to it, or a building? And all those sorts of things factor into the design. The next step, and then if we can have the next slide, is to consider whether something beyond just planting native plants and adjusting the shoreline a little bit in terms of grading is needed. And we find that a number of techniques exist out there where you have a little bit more of a problem with erosion, and you might use an erosion control mat like we see on the right side. But that's not you. You're not erosion control mat. You're Matt Lasch. And then in the upper left-hand image there, we have a we have live stakes. Did you know, Dick, you probably do know this, that you can actually cut willow and dogwood stakes, sharpen them up like a punji stick, and stick it in the ground, and it will actually establish roots.
I knew that.
I know you knew that. You've probably used them before.
Yeah, you know, I'm an ecologist too.
So you can use these live stakes, or the lower left hand in that image are these things called coconut fiber rolls, which have a life of several years depending on how thick they are. And you can place them either offshore or right on the shoreline. You can use those as a way to attenuate the wave action so they don't smack into your young planting, or to stabilize the slope. And you can actually plant into those things when they become wet, and then the plants grow over them, and you don't realize that there's actually something a little bit firmer than just the soil underneath it. If we can look at the next slide here, there are other ways of stabilizing steep banks. Sometimes you have a 5-foot drop on a vertical face from the shoreline up to where the land is. And in that case, you've got to try to bridge that gap. And we use these things called brush fascines, brush layering, and soil lifts. And each of these is a technique that works really well in lieu of using boulders or concrete revetments and things like that, or gabions. Although sometimes we use those hard structures too in even more severe situations.
There are some situations that are so severe they just don't lend themselves to anything but the hard armoring. Our watershed district, Minnetonka Creek Watershed District, is now, through their regulatory program, not allowing any more riprap or hard armoring except where it's demonstrated to be needed.
Wow.
Within the waters of Minnetonka Creek watershed.
When did that start?
About a year or two ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so does the landowner have to submit some kind of a design that demonstrates the watershed district that the hard armoring is necessary?
A design or an engineering analysis that basically looks at wave energy and so on, that shows that that's the only method that is available or suitable for that situation. Mostly it won't be too applicable anymore. Most of the area on Lake Minnetonka that requires that has it already.
All right.
And there's a provision to maintain riprapping or hard armoring if that's in place already. For new properties, if they can't demonstrate the need, then they have to use an alternative method.
Understood, understood. Well, that's pretty advanced.
It is, it is. We have
Wonderful.
a watershed district who is at the forefront here in many ways.
Yeah.
Why don't you continue?
Well, we're going to talk then about some specific projects, Dick.
I knew that. And we're all waiting to hear.
That's right, with bated breath.
Yes.
So Matt, who has worked on many projects around the region, is going to talk about 3 projects. And you worked on all 3 of these, I think, or 2 of them with Doug Mensing.
Correct.
And what was really neat about that is we were able to use what we call design build, which is you don't design and then go out and find your contractor and get a bid from them and decide to go with them, but rather you just say, we're going to just go from soup to nuts, design to end construction to construction oversight with one contractor. And that actually works out really nicely because you can find ways to speed things along in that process. And so we're pretty pleased with that process.
Yeah.
You want to talk about
The
it?
first project was called the Newman Residence. It's actually on Lake Minnetonka. And the picture on the far left there, you can see they had just kind of put some temporary erosion control measures in there, and obviously the bank was undercutting below there. So they had some pretty severe erosion going on, and the house is not that far away. Not only were they losing some of their trees, but their house is not that far away, and they were worried about that. So the middle one you can see is they started construction, and there was actually, this would be more one of those combination of hard armor and soft surface ones where they did some rock gabions below the water surface to kind of toe in that slope, and then above the high water mark or normal water mark, they did some native plantings and seeding to get that slope stabilized. And then on the far right, you can see that that's what it looks like once it's stabilized. And we've been managing that project for a number of years now, and the client's very happy, and the slope is very stable. So it has done its job, and it's obviously been sustainable for the number of years now. The next project is also on Lake Minnetonka, and there was actually 2 projects with this camp, but this particular one was a little bit more on the shoreline. This is for Camptico, and what they had was as Kim mentioned earlier, pretty bad erosion coming from the slope above the shoreline, and it was actually washing away an active use beach. They take the kids down there for swimming, and the far end of it that you can kind of see in that far left slide was pretty much, they were putting a bunch of sand on it. It was just washing into the lake. So what we ended up doing was there was some work that was done up slope, rain garden and some water diverters and things like that to get the water taken away. But then we also put a couple of retaining walls just to take away the steep bank. And then as you can see on the far right, that's after, we did some plug planting and put in some bio logs just to, again, stabilize that, toe in that slope. But again, that's been there for a number of years now, and they actually use that beach still for swimming. The bio logs have gotten pressed down quite a bit from use of the kids running over them, but it's been stable and it's been sustainable for a number of years now.
And the last picture on the right from the previous slide I assume is not the final condition, but that's shortly after the plantings?
That one is shortly after the plantings. It has now filled in a little bit
Yeah.
more, but their intention was they wanted some openings for the kids to get down to the beach still, so we couldn't put plantings the whole way. So as you can kind of see, there's clumps of them. That way the kids can still get down there, but it has filled in a little bit more since then, correct?
Okay.
And that's a really important point to bring up, Dick, that these things do take 2-3 years
Right.
to fully mature. And if you're an impatient person, go with the riprap.
And then the third project is actually not on Lake Minnetonka, but it's over in Immigrant Heights. But this is more of what many folks do on their own property. It's more of a soft surface. There was no biologs, there was no soil lifts. It's just, it was the pond there had dropped in level, and so the old high water mark had started eroding down and bringing sediment into the pond. And so all we really did was remove the vegetation, kill off the vegetation, did some seeding and planting, and then maintained it for a couple of years and put some erosion control blanket down. And again, it's only actually about 2 or 3 years old, but it's already started to show, as you can see on the far right, there's some pretty colors, and again, those deep roots are now established and will just continue getting better and better every year.
Yeah, those 2 interesting plants on the right, the purple one and the yellow one, are early indicators of success. The purple one is called bergamot. Wild bergamot, thank you. Monarda fistulosa is its scientific name. And the leaves of that contain an oil which is used in Earl Grey tea. The oil of Monarda fistulosa bergamot is used in Earl Grey tea, which is, I was fascinated when I learned that. And the yellow one is, of course, Black-Eyed Susan, and both of those can come on strong in the second year. In fact, Black-Eyed Susan comes on strong in the first year. So if we put those in a seed mix as a tracer, and we see them showing up when they need to show up, makes us really happy and very relieved as well, of course.
Well, good. This is very interesting. People will be interested about cost and probably what it takes to maintain these areas.
Yep, and it really comes down to what's needed for the project. If you go the soft surface route where there's just some vegetation removal, seeding, planting, blanketing, and a little bit of management, you can usually get away for, if on an average shoreline, maybe a 10 or 15 foot buffer of a 50 to 100 foot lot line for maybe a couple of thousand somewhere there, depending on how many forbs you had in there, how many grasses you had in there, how many plugs you had in there. So some variables go into it. Now, as you get more into the biologs and soil lifts and things like that, you're really starting to talk more into the cost is going to be reflective of the design and what's needed. So you might be getting more into the 10s to 20s, somewhere in there, depending again on what's needed, how long of stretch, how big of a slope you have. So there's quite a few factors that go into it.
And hard armoring also adds to the cost. If you have to
Correct.
put gabions in, for example, and those costs are pretty well known, and they can be quite high.
Right. So in situations where hard armoring may also be an option, the costs are probably comparable?
I would say no.
I would almost say if you're going to use hard armor versus a soft surface in the long run might be actually less expensive.
Exactly.
Okay.
That would be
All right.
my opinion.
Yeah, and you all, of course, will work with clients and let them know up front what they're in for.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't spring the bill at the end. I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay, that was a softball. All right, and then as far as maintaining?
Yeah, usually we recommend 2 to 3 years of management. Now, the management usually consists of, for the vegetation, going in there, doing some mowing, doing some spot herbicide, possibly some prescribed burning. But usually those prairie plants or those wetland plants take 2 to 3 years to establish. So by the time we leave on that 3rd year, we hope to at least see what's supposed to be there, maybe still in the young stages, but really starting to establish. We've seen many that don't get maintained, are just kind of thrown down and left, and those are the ones that end up being a failure. When it comes to some of the biologs and erosion control blanket, things like that, those are just left as is. They don't need any kind of maintenance for themselves. They're just kind of deteriorate and hopefully get taken over with plant roots.
Okay. Well, as I warned you, we're almost out of time. It goes very quickly.
That went fast.
Yeah, it goes at a rate of about 1 minute per minute. It seems to go fast. But thank you, and there's contact information we're going to show for if people are interested how to find you. Which one are you? You're lower left.
Lower left,
Northwoods.
Yeah.
Northwoods.
Yes, and they can contact the Lake Minnetonka Association as well, and we'll forward to interested parties also. And they always show the Lake Minnetonka Association contact information at the end here because we are the producer.
And that's as it should be, Jack.
As it should be.
Give credit where credit is due.
And we like to have fun with that. So again, thank you,
Yes.
Kim and Matt.
My
Yes,
pleasure.
thank you.
Thanks for
And-
inviting us in.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We had fun. We knew we would.
Yes, we
right.
did.
All right. Okay, thank you all for watching, as always, and we'll see you with another show in a couple months.